I sat in the softly lit dining room of a colonial estate in Savannah, Georgia. The morning sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, dancing across fine china and a freshly polished oak table. The air smelled faintly of roses and cinnamon waffles. If you didn't know better, you'd think this was the picture of family harmony. But I wasn't fooled. Across from me, my sister-in-law, Jenna Holloway, stirred her cappuccino with mechanical precision. Her green eyes, always too curious, never left my face. My husband, Nolan, stood behind me, gently placing a porcelain cup in front of me. "I brewed it myself, Cora," he said with a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. "New blend. Just for you." I stared at the coffee, its steam curling like a snake from the surface. Something about it smelled, not burned, not spoiled, just unnatural. Ugh. I didn't lift the cup. "You're breaking our little tradition," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Since when do I drink anything but iced coffee?" Nolan shrugged. "Thought I'd shake things up." Jenna smiled tightly. "I already tried it. It's delightful." Her voice was too calm, too rehearsed. I pretended to fiddle with my napkin, glancing between the two of them. I wasn't imagining things. Over the past year, I'd been hospitalized 3 times after eating at Jenna's events. Allergic reactions, sudden fevers, migraines strong enough to blur my vision. The doctors never found anything conclusive. But the pattern was always the same. Nolan always had excuses. Jenna always sent flowers. Neither of them ever stayed with me. I looked at the untouched cup in front of me, then at the 2 matching ones in their hands. "Where were you both last night?" I asked casually. "You weren't home when I went to bed." Jenna didn't flinch. Nolan blinked just once. "We were finalizing your anniversary surprise. You'll love it." "Really?" I murmured. "You've never been much of a planner." I reached into my purse as if looking for my phone, keeping my voice light, though my pulse had tripled. When I stood, I carried the cup with me. "Excuse me, I think I left my phone in the hallway. Be right back." As I walked around the table, I deliberately nudged Jenna's chair with my hip. "Oh, sorry," I said, jolting the table and tilting a few utensils. As I leaned forward to fix a napkin, my hand moved quickly, practiced from months of living in suspicion. I switched our cups. Hers for mine. Neither said a word. In the hallway, I ducked into Nolan's home office and left the door cracked just enough to see the table. Jenna was speaking softly, too far to hear. Then she lifted the cup I had left, brought it to her lips, and drank. I waited. 10 seconds. Funny. Nothing. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe. Suddenly, Jenna's hand gripped the edge of the table. Her jaw clenched. Her pupils dilated. "What the hell?" Nolan stood, panic creeping into his voice. "Jenna." My throat, it burns. I stepped out, phone already recording in my hand. "Feeling unwell?" I asked calmly. Jenna turned to Nolan, eyes wide and betrayed. "You said it would only make her tired. Not this." "You told her." I asked Nolan. "What exactly did you promise her?" He froze. "That wasn't her cup," he muttered. "That's the problem," I replied. "And I recorded everything." The room went still. Jenna clutched her abdomen, gasping. Nolan fumbled with his phone. "Call 911, he yelled. "I already did," I said. Jenna collapsed onto the floor. And all I could do was watch the people I once called family unravel before me, because I had finally set the trap they were walking into all along. The ambulance's wailing siren faded into the distance as I stood alone on the porch. The damp Georgia air clung to my skin, thick with the scent of pine and betrayal. My hands trembled, not from fear but from release. Months of doubt, paranoia, and aching loneliness had finally boiled over into one clear, undeniable truth. Nolan and Jenna were trying to kill me. No. I had proof. Inside, the house felt colder than it should. I walked back through the dining room, past the mess of half-eaten croissants and overturned silverware. A wine glass lay shattered on the floor, red droplets staining the ivory rug like blood. Nolan's phone vibrated where he'd left it in the chaos. I picked it up without hesitation. My fingerprints were the least of my concerns now. 3 missed calls. 2 new texts from JM. And a voice memo file labeled Murder Plan 2.0. Not subtle. I opened the file. His voice filled the room, low, hurried, afraid. We need to do it soon. He's getting suspicious. Use the Valadrine this time, just enough to make it look natural. If we don't, we both lose everything. My stomach twisted. Valadrine. A tranquilizer. In small doses, it mimics natural organ failure. In large doses, cardiac arrest. I scrolled through the rest of the audio files. There were at least 4 more. All recorded over the past 2 months. All conversations with Jenna. All disgusting. She has no prenup, remember? Once she's gone, we split the assets. I take the house and stocks. You get the gallery. That's fair. That's fair. I laughed bitterly. After 10 years of marriage, countless sleepless nights supporting Nolan's empty ambitions, he thought he deserved my home. My savings. My life. I transferred the files to my laptop, then uploaded them to a private cloud. If anything happened to me, I wanted the world to hear these recordings. But this wasn't just about safety anymore. This was about retribution. By the time Nolan came stumbling back through the door, his shirt half-buttoned, face pale and furious, I was ready. I sat on the couch with a glass of water and a smile. She'll live, he muttered, pacing. They pumped her stomach. She's claiming I poisoned her. Do you realize how insane that is? I tilted my head. Actually, it makes perfect sense. Especially since I have audio recordings, fingerprints on the poison bottle, and a full toxicology report that now implicates both of you. He stopped cold. What are you talking about? I switched the cups, Nolan. I watched Jenna drink what you gave me. You both plotted this. Repeatedly. And now I have it all documented. He rushed toward me but stopped short as I reached for my phone. One more step and this goes to the police. Actually, scratch that. It already went. A detective will be here in the morning. You're bluffing. Try me. He backed off, jaw clenched, eyes wild. You think this is justice? He hissed. You think anyone will believe you after what I say? You're mentally unstable. You've had episodes. Remember Dr. Clausen's report? I stood up slowly, a fire building in my chest. Yeah, I remember. You coached me into saying I was overworked and anxious. You wanted that on record, didn't you? Another part of the plan. Another reason to discredit me when you pulled the trigger. He didn't deny it. And that was all I needed. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I drove across town to my friend Diana's law firm. She was still in the office, she always worked late. I showed her everything. The voice memos. The texts. The coffee cup sealed in a plastic bag. Jenna's blood work results. The paramedics' incident report. It was a gold mine of evidence. Diana listened in silence. When the final audio ended, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Cora, this is attempted murder. I nodded. I know. She pulled out a thick folder from her drawer. Let's make sure they both pay. By dawn, I'd filed a restraining order. By noon, Nolan had been served. And by the end of the day, his bank accounts were frozen. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted ruin. And I had only just begun. 3 days passed in a blur of lawyers, investigators, and half-eaten takeout containers. I barely slept. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from Jenna's attorney, from Nolan's office, from my mother, who was still tragically unaware that her son-in-law had tried to poison me. Every time the phone lit up, it was another attempt at spin, denial, or thinly veiled threats. But I didn't flinch. Because now I had something they didn't expect. A strategy. Diana and I moved fast. Faster than Nolan could ever imagine. She connected me with a private investigator named Victor Reyes, a retired homicide detective who now specialized in white-collar crime and spousal betrayal. He didn't just gather evidence. He built cases like an architect builds skyscrapers, from the foundation up. Victor found more than I could have hoped for. First, Jenna and Nolan had opened a joint offshore account, one that had received 2 separate wire transfers just weeks before the incident. A combined total of $200,000. Likely my money. My investments. Cashed out from a dummy trust Nolan had created 6 months prior, using forged documents. Second, Victor uncovered a string of text messages between Jenna and her assistant, who was actually a fixer for hire. Someone who specialized in clean exits. Third, and this one burned the most, he found a prenup. A secret prenup Nolan had forged and backdated, claiming I'd signed it during our honeymoon in Bali. The signature? A crude copy of my old initials, lifted from a rental car receipt. It was sloppy, desperate. And it was exactly what I needed. By Friday we had enough to go nuclear. I sat in my apartment, now a makeshift war room, staring at the mountain of proof. Nolan's voice echoed through my earbuds as I re-listened to one of the recordings, the venom in his tone unmistakable. She's so obsessed with being the strong one. Always sacrificing. Always building things. It's exhausting. Let her burn out. We'll sweep the ashes. Ashes. He thought I'd be ashes. Oh, Nolan. I'm fire. The press was next. I'd been quiet long enough. With Victor's help, I leaked everything, discreetly. First to a blog that covered corruption in high society circles. Then to a reporter at the Ledger, a respected local news outlet. The story had it all: betrayal, attempted murder, art world drama, fraud, and a poison plot fit for true crime podcasts. Within 24 hours it was trending. Hashtag poison plot. Hashtag gallery of greed. Hashtag Cora speaks. I hadn't even spoken publicly yet, but that didn't matter. The evidence spoke for itself. Suddenly, Jenna was dropped by her gallery sponsors. Nolan's name was scrubbed from a startup board he'd recently joined. And I was being offered interviews. But I wasn't interested in fame. I wanted a courtroom. Nolan finally cracked. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, pounding on the door. "You ruined my life," he shouted, voice hoarse. "You think you're untouchable? You think you'll win? You have no idea how far this goes, Cora." I opened the door just enough to look him in the eye. "Far enough that you'll die in prison? Probably." He lunged forward, but the lock held. And behind him, parked across the street, was Victor's van, with a dashcam recording everything. "Say hi to the jury," I whispered. He stumbled back, rage morphing into fear. "Why are you doing this?" he rasped. I almost laughed. "You tried to erase me. Now I'm erasing you." I slammed the door shut. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and finally, allowed my hands to stop shaking. The war wasn't over. But the tide had turned. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I'd go for the jugular. The courtroom smelled like cold coffee and old varnish. The walls were lined with framed portraits of judges long dead, and the hum of fluorescent lights vibrated through my skull like a migraine waiting to happen. I stood at the plaintiff's table, not as a broken woman seeking pity, but as a survivor armed to the teeth. Nolan sat across from me, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. His expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat stains creeping down his back. Beside him, his high-powered attorney, Melissa Crane, flipped through a stack of motions like she was auditioning for a legal drama. She didn't scare me. Not anymore. My team? Diana as lead counsel. Victor as my investigator. And seated in the gallery, my Aunt Rose, who had flown in from Chicago just to be here. She gave me a silent nod that said, "Let them burn." The trial began with jury selection. Nolan's side tried to strike any juror who looked remotely sympathetic. Nurses, teachers, even a woman who ran a domestic violence shelter. Diana countered with poise and precision, and by the end of the day we had a jury that looked like the real world. Tired. Smart. Watching. Opening statements came next. Diana rose slowly, like a storm cloud gathering strength. "This is not a case about heartbreak. This is a case about calculated destruction. About a woman nearly murdered for money. About a husband who wanted a promotion more than he wanted a pulse on his wife. The jury leaned forward. Then Nolan's lawyer stood and painted a picture of a paranoid, hysterical woman with a victim complex and a vendetta. I almost smiled. Let them underestimate me. The evidence hit like a freight train. We presented the fake prenup first, using handwriting analysts and document forensics. The jury gasped when they saw the timestamp metadata that contradicted the supposed creation date. Then came the poison. Diana called in the toxicologist who had treated me. He explained, down to the molecule, how the compound had been slipped into my water bottles during a gallery event. Not only was it detectable, it had been traced to Nolan's corporate lab access card. Boom. Victor walked the jury through the bank accounts next. Wire transfers, offshore holdings, dummy trusts, each slide more damning than the last. Then we dropped the text. Screenshots between Jenna and her fixer. Words like dosage, non-detectable, and exit strategy. Jenna's voice memo saying, she won't know until it's too late. Too late. But I had survived. Nolan refused to testify. His lawyer said it was strategic. We all knew it was fear. Jenna, however, wasn't so lucky. Subpoenaed. Cornered. And under oath she cracked. She tried to paint herself as manipulated, coerced by Nolan's charm and promises. But the messages, the accounts, the voice memos, none of it aligned with her version of events. She cried on the stand, trembled. But when asked, did you knowingly conspire to harm Cora Mitchell for financial gain? She paused too long. That pause was her confession. By the closing arguments, the courtroom was buzzing. Diana stood once more. You don't need to be a doctor to know this wasn't an accident. You don't need to be a banker to see the fraud. You just need to ask yourself one question. What would have happened if Cora hadn't survived? Silence. Because that was their plan. No. It's time they answer for it. The jury was out for 6 hours. Felt like 60. I sat in the hallway, hands clenched around a photo of my parents. They died 10 years ago. Car crash. Never got to meet Nolan. Never got to see the woman I'd become. I hoped they'd be proud. When the verdict came, I didn't breathe until the words hit the air. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Cora Mitchell. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $3 million. And punitive damages in the amount of $10 million. Gasps. Whispers. A gavel bang. Nolan's jaw dropped. Jenna sobbed. I didn't smile. I exhaled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd ended it. I turned to Diana. We're done. She nodded. We're done. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted my name. I didn't stop. I walked past them all into the cool afternoon air where everything finally felt quiet. For the first time in months, I was no longer prey. I was free. I had imagined what freedom would feel like. But the truth? It wasn't a parade or champagne. It was quieter. Like walking out of a storm cellar to find your house still standing, but everything inside rearranged. A week after the verdict, Nolan's assets were frozen. His company distanced itself with a public statement that used words like deep regret and isolated incident. Jenna's influencer brand? Torched. Sponsors dropped her within hours. The internet was savage. Me. I was offered interviews, book deals, even a made-for-streaming series. I declined them all. I went home, my real home. The one I hadn't been able to afford during the trial. A small cottage I'd inherited from my grandmother before Nolan convinced me to rent it out for passive income. I walked through the door barefoot on the old wooden floors and just stood there. No cameras. No questions. No gaslighting. Just sunlight and silence. I didn't cry until I unpacked a box labeled, Gallery, Private. Inside were photos from my first exhibition. My hands shaking as I cut the ribbon. Nolan fake smiling beside me. And tucked between two flyers, a handwritten note from my mentor. You don't owe the world your pain, Cora. But if you choose to share it, make sure it's on your terms. Those words hit differently now. Diana called later that evening. We have a problem, she said, voice tight. What kind? Jenna's attorney just filed for bankruptcy. She's trying to shield her assets under a fraudulent shell company. Of course she was. And Nolan? I asked. He's negotiating. That made me laugh. I wasn't done. The next week we filed civil fraud charges against both of them. Jenna's finances were tangled in crypto and luxury gifts, most of which were traced and seized. She tried to sell a bracelet I once gave her for bail money. Nolan, meanwhile, attempted a settlement. His lawyer offered me a deal, $15 million upfront, no appeals, but with a gag order. I read it twice, laughed, then tossed it back. Tell Nolan I don't settle with men who try to murder me. I bury them legally. It was Aunt Rose who helped me see the bigger picture. We sat on her porch drinking lemonade that was 90% vodka. You can't fight forever, honey, she said. I'm not fighting. I'm finishing. She stared at me. And what comes after? That question stopped me cold. Because I didn't know. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I painted. Not for a gallery. Not for Nolan. Just for me. The canvas was brutal. Stark reds. Harsh blacks. Smears of white that looked like bone. It was ugly. It was honest. It was mine. One morning I woke up to find a package on my porch. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box. And inside that, a key. Took me a second. Then I remembered. Nolan's backup storage unit. The one he told me never to worry about. I went there that afternoon. Diana insisted on sending Victor with me. Just in case. The unit was musty, filled with old tech, dusty paintings he never let me hang in, a safe. Victor cracked it like a magician. Inside, a flash drive. And a notebook labeled, contingencies. It was his plan B. Insurance in case things went south. And buried inside it, a list of names, payouts, and a detailed journal entry titled, How to Make a Woman Disappear Without Killing Her Legally. I felt sick. But I smiled. This was the final nail. We brought it to the DA. They reopened the criminal case. Now it wasn't just attempted poisoning. It was premeditation, conspiracy, racketeering. Jenna was the first to crack. She flipped, offered full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentencing. Named names. Confirmed every page of that notebook. Nolan was arrested again. This time there was no bail. I stood outside the courthouse watching him get loaded into the back of a black van, chained at the wrists. He looked at me once. Just once. And I mouthed, checkmate. But revenge. It doesn't fix everything. The scars remained, some visible, others buried deep. I still flinched at the scent of bleach. Still checked the seals on every drink. Still woke up gasping from dreams that weren't dreams. But I was healing. Not because they paid. Because I survived. And because I chose not to let that survival turn me bitter. I opened a foundation 2 months later. For women like me. For survivors with no voice, no leverage, no trust left in the system. We called it Second Sight. Because seeing the truth even when it hurts, is the first step to taking back your power. I spoke at the launch gala. Wore a red dress. No sleeves. Scars on display. My name is Cora Mitchell, I said into the mic. I was nearly erased by the people I trusted most. But I came back louder. Stronger. Sharper. And now, I'm here to make sure no one else has to come back alone. Applause. But it was the silence that followed that meant more. Because it meant they believed me. Finally. 2 months passed. The media frenzy died down, replaced by the next scandal, the next tragedy. But I stayed center stage in one world. The world of survivors, advocates, and those clawing their way out of silence. My inbox overflowed. Women, strangers, sharing their stories, their pain, their need to be heard. Some messages were only a few words. Thank you. He did the same to me. How did you survive? I read every single one. And replied to most. Because someone had to. Jenna sent a letter from prison. 3 pages handwritten in her usual dramatic cursive. I was desperate. I was jealous. But mostly I was weak. She tried to explain how Nolan manipulated her too. How he dangled fame, money, security. How she convinced herself I'd be fine. That I'd recover. That she didn't mean to ruin me. I burned the letter. Then mailed back a photo of my foundation's ribbon-cutting ceremony. Let her chew on that. Diana and I became closer than ever. We weren't just lawyer and client anymore. She was my ally. My sister in the shadows. You're different now, she said one night over drinks. Sharper. Louder. I was always this way, I told her. I just stopped hiding it. We started training sessions through Second Sight. Not self-defense, though we offered that too, but legal literacy, financial protection, digital forensics. One woman brought her teenage daughter. She needs to know how to see it before it happens, she whispered. I saw myself in that girl. Bright eyes. A bit too trusting. So I sat beside her and said, ask me anything. No filters. She did. And for the first time I told my full story, start to almost end. The silence afterward wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. That night I couldn't sleep. So I walked into my studio and stared at a blank canvas. And began. The painting took 3 days. It was titled, Resurrection in Red. A woman with a bleeding halo. Not broken, just bruised. Arms stretched, not in surrender but defiance. It sold before I even finished signing it. The buyer? A gallery in Berlin. They wanted more. But art wasn't enough anymore. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a muscle. He had to keep flexing it. So when Diana brought me a new case, a girl named Marisol poisoned by her fiancé with sleeping pills, I didn't hesitate. I want in, I told her. You're not a lawyer. No, I said, but I'm a survivor, and sometimes that's louder in court. We formed a team. Advocates, trauma counselors, private investigators. We called it the Sisterhood Pact. The motto? If they try to bury you, be the seed. Victor joined us too. He left his old firm. Said corporate law felt like paper cuts now. I'd rather fight monsters with you, he said with a shrug. I laughed. Then suit up. We handled 6 cases in 4 months. 1-5. The 6th settled out of court, but not before the abuser lost his job, his sponsorships, and his public persona. One victim hugged me afterward. You made me feel human again, she said. No court win felt better than that. One morning I walked through the doors of my old gallery. The owner nearly choked on his espresso. Cora? Jesus. Hi. I smiled. I'm not here for apologies. What then? I'm buying it. His face went pale. It's not. I already spoke to the board. Check your inbox. I renamed it Gallery Phoenix. Not just for art but for truth. Each month we featured works by survivors. Stories carved into canvas, clay, sound, and steel. Some raw, some tender. All real. At the first exhibit I stood beside Diana and Victor as the crowd walked silently through. A woman in a wheelchair stared at a sculpture of shattered glass shaped like a woman's heart. She didn't say anything. Just reached out and touched it. That's when I knew. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were reshaping the world. But there was one more thing I had to do. I drove 5 hours north to visit a rehab center tucked between 2 mountains. Inside was a woman with shaking hands and a frail frame. Her name was Eloise. My mother. I hadn't spoken to her since before the trial. She disappeared when things got hard. Again. That was her pattern. But this time she'd reached out. A postcard with 3 words. I'm trying, Cora. She looked up from her chair, eyes glassy. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. I didn't come here to. Her lips trembled. Then why? Because the only way the cycle ends is if someone decides to face it. We sat for an hour. No screaming. No crying. Just truth. It wasn't healing. But it was a start. Back at the car, I exhaled deeply. And for the first time since Nolan slipped that poison into my wine glass, I realized. I didn't feel broken. I felt reborn. By spring, the Sisterhood Pact had spread across 4 cities. What started as one foundation now had chapters, volunteers, hotlines, and 3 full-time lawyers. We had a waiting list of women asking for help, and another list of professionals ready to offer it. But the media had been quiet. Too quiet. Until the Echo Hour called. They wanted me on their primetime special, Modern Martyrs, Women Who Fought Back. First I said no. I didn't want to be paraded again. Another cautionary tale with dramatic piano music and filtered lighting. But Diana convinced me. Don't do it for the cameras, she said. Do it for the girls who need to see what surviving looks like after the credits roll. He was right. The studio was cold, the air too sterilized, the host too perfectly powdered. But when the cameras rolled, I spoke plainly. Not with trembling emotion. Not as a victim. But as a damn storm. I told them about the poison, the betrayal, the courtroom, the letters, the rage. I told them about the art, the center, the women who came to us when no one else would believe them. The host blinked. You seem so together, she said. So strong. I tilted my head. That's the point. The segment went viral in a day. 10 million views by the weekend. And suddenly the world remembered my name. But this time not as the poisoned wife. Now they called me the voice of reckoning. I received a letter from Kyle's brother. He'd stayed silent all these years, but now he apologized. Said Kyle was always competitive, always dark in his quietest moments. He hadn't believed me before. Now he wanted to help fund the Sisterhood Pact in Austin. I told him no. But thanked him anyway. Forgiveness isn't weakness. But trust isn't a door you can reopen with a donation. Then came Miranda. Not in person. A video. Sent by a mutual contact. She looked older. Not physically, her skin was still porcelain, her lashes curled, but something behind her eyes had changed. The sharpness was gone. Just tiredness. I don't expect you to listen, but I want you to know I tried to end it. She meant the poisoning plan. Too late. I told him I wanted out. He said I'd already gone too far. Then she talked about Kyle's threats. His control. His guilt trips. I was scared of him, Cora. But mostly I was scared of what I became with him. She paused. Then added, I've started therapy. I don't want your forgiveness. Just peace. I didn't reply. Not yet. One night I sat with Victor on the roof of my building, watching the skyline blink like a dying heart monitor. You ever feel like we're just patching holes in a sinking ship? I asked. Every day, he said. But patching is better than drowning. He handed me a folder. Inside, a proposal. An educational program. For colleges. Titled Red Flags 101. Workshops. Role play. Consent culture. Digital safety. Emotional abuse awareness. You want to take this into classrooms? I asked. I want to build a future where your story is unthinkable. I looked up at him. Then signed the bottom of the page. Let's do it. The first university to agree was small, just under 2,000 students. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the room of 60 undergrads staring at me as I spoke about coercion that doesn't look like force, about manipulation that feels like love. At the end, a boy raised his hand. What if I've done some of those things? He asked. Not poison, but pressuring, guilt-tripping. The room held its breath. And I said, then you do what the rest of us are doing. You unlearn. You apologize. You stop. And you never forget that people are watching you become who you are. He nodded. Didn't look away. It gave me hope. I ended that year painting something new. Not blood reds and war grays. This one was pastel blue, sky white, lavender mist. A girl standing on the edge of a cliff, but not falling. Flying. The title? Freedom Isn't Quiet. It sold for $25,000. Every penny went to our next shelter. And as I walked through the building that week, bare walls, cots still unwrapped, rooms echoing with the future, I knew. This wasn't just my revenge. This was my revolution. The first shelter opened on a rainy Tuesday. Gray skies, muddy shoes, trembling hands holding trash bags filled with everything they could carry. We named it the Lighthouse. Because that's what it was. A beacon for the lost. The second woman who checked in was a mother of two, escaping a fiancé who'd been slowly eroding her self-worth with phrases like, "You're lucky I love you," and "No one else would put up with you." She didn't cry. She folded towels. Then volunteered to make tea for everyone. By day 3, the other women were calling her Mama J. By day 10, she was helping write the shelter's morning routine policy. By week 4, she was hired as a full-time coordinator. That's the kind of place the Lighthouse became. Not a hiding spot. A launch pad. But you can't save others forever without dealing with your own ghosts. Mine returned in a leather-bound envelope. Legal parchment. Gold seal. The unmistakable mark of the Board of Clemency. Kyle had filed for early release. Said his health was declining. Said he'd been a model inmate. Said he deserved mercy. I wanted to burn the paper right then and there. But Victor stopped me. Read it, he said. Then decide. The hearing was scheduled for January 3rd. Same courtroom. Same judge. I hadn't been back in that room since the verdict. The smell hit first. Old paper and cleaning solution, like someone trying to cover up the past with lemon-scented lies. Kyle looked older. Not sicker. Just smaller. He tried to look pitiful. But his eyes, they were the same. Arrogant. Calculating. He gave a speech. Talked about regret. About God. About second chances. Then he looked at me. I hope Cora can one day find it in her heart to forgive me. My turn. I stood slowly. I didn't read from paper. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. He didn't just poison my body. He tried to poison my name, my memory, my belief that I was worth saving. I paused. He didn't want me dead. He wanted me erased. Then I looked at the judge. I don't care if he paints murals with his breakfast cereal or sings lullabies to puppies in his cell. He is not sorry. He is simply caught. Silence. Then the judge nodded. Request denied. Outside the courtroom I exhaled. Not relief. Not triumph. Just closure. I turned to Victor. Let's go home. Back at the Lighthouse, the kids were decorating for Valentine's Day already. One of the little ones, a curly-haired 6-year-old with a bruised lip and a crooked smile, handed me a paper heart. Read, "You're brave." And in crayon below it, "Even superheroes need hugs." I didn't cry. Not then. But later in my car I let it all go. Not just the pain. The guilt. The need to be the strong one all the time. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't surviving. It's letting yourself feel again. I called Diana that night. Told her I wanted to expand. Another shelter. This one in Atlanta. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. The movement was growing. Not like wildfire. Like roots. Invisible. Unshakable. One evening, I received a letter from a high school girl in Oregon. Her name was Lacey. She wrote, "Your story showed me I didn't have to stay. I left last week. I'm in a safe place now. I think I might start painting again. I used to love it before, everything." She ended it with, "Thank you for being loud." I pinned that letter above my desk. Next to the heart from the little boy. Next to a quote I'd painted in thick black ink. "We are not survivors because we were broken. We are survivors because we rebuilt in spite of it." I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't trying to be famous. I was just a woman who'd been hurt. And refused to let that be the end of the story. 2 months after the parole hearing, a headline hit the local news. Ex-state prosecutor convicted in tampering scandal involving high-profile case. It was Miranda. My sister. The woman who once shared a bedroom with me, whispered secrets under fairy lights, and later conspired to watch me die. She'd finally been caught. Not for my case, ironically, but for mishandling others. Turns out Miranda had been reallocating case evidence, manipulating witness order, and even silencing certain complaints for years, quietly burying the truth beneath layers of professional charm and tailored suits. She wasn't just my traitor. She was everyone's. I sat in my office at the lighthouse staring at her mugshot on the news. Hair disheveled. Lipstick faded. Eyes still defiant. "Do you want to make a statement?" Diana asked gently from the doorway. I didn't even turn around. "No," I said. "The truth is finally louder than me now. Let it speak." Kyle's name came up again shortly after. Apparently, Miranda had helped shield him even before the poisoning. She'd been turning away rumors, squashing HR complaints, and rerouting accountability his way for years. They were more than partners in crime. They were an empire of manipulation. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't angry. I was numb. Like the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place, and all I could do was stare at the picture. Victor found me on the rooftop that night, clutching a cup of cold tea, staring up at the sky. "You okay?" I nodded. But I wasn't. He sat beside me anyway. "You built a world they can't touch anymore." I exhaled slowly. Then why do I still feel like I'm waiting for the next hit? He didn't answer right away. Just looked out over the city with me. Then he said, "Because trauma doesn't disappear. It gets quieter. And when the world gets silent enough, we hear it again." In April, we opened our third shelter, the Hearth. Aptly named. Because warmth wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It became a place where women and kids painted murals, cooked meals together, and left notes of encouragement under each other's pillows. It became a place where laughter didn't sound guilty anymore. It became a place where I finally started to laugh again. I got a call from a woman named Isabel. She was a nurse in her 50s. Had just left her abusive husband of 27 years. Said she'd never told anyone. Until she saw me speak at a conference last year. "You didn't look scared," she said. I smiled even though she couldn't see it. "That's because I was. I just did it anyway." Later that month, I received a manila envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note. "You beat me. But I'm still in your head." No signature. But I knew the handwriting. Kyle. It wasn't mailed from prison. It was smuggled. Some guard, some contact, someone had done him a favor. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I burned the letter. Watched it curl into black ash on the stove. Not because it scared me, but because he no longer deserved to exist in my space. I didn't tell the police. Didn't escalate it. That's the thing about healing. You stop needing justice to look like vengeance. Sometimes healing is just not answering the door when the past comes knocking. We began hosting weekend art therapy retreats. No talking. Just painting. Colors said what words couldn't. There were canvases smeared with rage. Others with joy. Some that were blank except for a small red dot in the corner. Each story different. Each survival valid. Each woman reborn. At one retreat, I met a teenage girl named Amara. She hadn't spoken since her stepfather's arrest. But she came to every session. Painted flowers. Always in blue. One day she slipped me a note. Your voice is loud. But your silence is louder. It hit me like a wave. I hugged her. No words. Just presence. Sometimes that's all we need to offer. As the year turned, I realized something. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was multiplying it. Through every woman who walked through those doors. Through every kid who found sleep without fear. Through every letter sent by someone who realized they mattered. The fire they started to destroy me? I used it to light 1,000 candles. The sky over the lighthouse was streaked with gold. Sunset poured in through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the reclaimed wood floors and the soft clatter of evening conversation. The shelter felt alive, like a breathing, growing being. Kids laughing in the playroom. Women chatting over herbal tea. A dog barked somewhere. Someone was humming in the kitchen. And in the quiet office at the end of the hall, I sat across from a reporter named Shelby Grant. You sure you want to go on the record? She asked, her voice hesitant. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Me, Diana, Victor, and a dozen others from the first wave of survivors we'd helped. Faces weathered but smiling. Some had found homes. Some had found careers. Some just found themselves again. My voice was steady when I finally spoke. Yes. The article dropped 3 weeks later. It wasn't just a local piece. It was a national feature. Front page of the Beacon magazine. From poison to power, the woman who refused to die quietly. It didn't name Kyle or Miranda. It didn't dwell on tragedy. It focused on the aftermath, on the systems we'd built, the lives we'd changed, the spaces we'd protected. The story wasn't about what had been taken from me. It was about what I chose to build in the wreckage. Letters poured in. Emails. Voicemails. Messages from women across the country. Some were angry. Some were inspired. Some were just broken. But all of them felt seen. That fall, I was invited to speak at a global women's summit in Geneva. It felt surreal. I stood at the podium staring out at a sea of faces. Activists, politicians, journalists, students. People who'd read my story. People who didn't know the name Everly Hayes but knew the fire she survived. I told them about the lighthouse. About the hearth. About the blue flowers Amara painted. About the way Diana folded every blanket like it was armor. About the notes we left under pillows. About healing without headlines. And then I said, my name isn't Everly Hayes anymore. It used to be the name of a victim. Now I'm someone else. Someone I chose. Someone free. Legally, I hadn't changed it. But spiritually, emotionally, I had buried her. Not out of shame, but out of love. Because she got me here. And now it was my turn to carry us forward. Victor and I started seeing each other outside of work. Slowly. Cautiously. Like two people who knew what it meant to lose everything and still want to try again. One evening, sitting on the rooftop under string lights, he looked at me and said, "You don't flinch anymore when I touch your hand." I blinked. Swallowed hard. I used to. He smiled softly. Yeah. Like every part of you was bracing for pain. I nodded. And leaned my head on his shoulder. Maybe that was love now. Not fireworks. Not grand gestures. Just safety that stays. Miranda got sentenced to 6 years. She cried in court. Not for what she'd done. But because no one came to defend her. Kyle remained behind bars. He never sent another letter. Eventually I stopped checking. Stopped wondering. Stopped waiting. In the spring we bought a cabin in the mountains. Not for me but for the nest, our newest retreat for women who needed deep isolation and calm. No phones. No cameras. Just wind, trees, and the quiet process of remembering how to breathe. On the wall of the main room, we painted one sentence in thick gold lettering. You are not hard to love. You were just taught by those who couldn't. It became a mantra. A compass. By year's end, we'd helped over 2,000 women. Not all stayed. Not all healed. But all left with more than they came in with. One night, Victor asked me, "Do you ever miss the life you had before?" I thought about it. About the quiet house. The perfect career. The mirror I used to stare into and not recognize the woman behind it. No, I said. I only miss the version of me that never got the chance to exist. He nodded. Then whispered, "She's here now." I smiled. Closed my eyes. And whispered back, "She is."